So hi, and welcome back to the 50/50 Project, where every week I talk about one thing I've learned for each year I've lived. We are on week 4 of the project itself, thing number 3, and week 2, unfortunately, of tortured allergy voice. So thanks for coming back anyway. I'm grateful and a little shocked. This week I've got the first installment of the work category. I don't know if you can hear this in the background, but as I record, there's a lot of construction going on at a site across the street, so I guess that's maybe thematically appropriate, but hopefully not too annoying in terms of audio. Anyway, when I'm not drawing silly PowerPoint slides with felt tip markers, I actually work in strategic communications. But I've had a lot of different jobs along a pretty winding and sometimes weird path to get to what I'm presently doing. And a lot of the things I've learned about life itself have come to me in the workplace, usually from coworkers, good and bad and hilarious and sometimes harrowing. For lack of a better phrase, I guess, the work of doing the work has taught me a lot. So I'm not surprised that work has emerged as a category in this list. So let's get to work with thing number 3. Build your fences, but then work your ground. This is about boundary setting. I read a lot about organizational psychology and workplace culture, so I hear a lot of chatter about boundaries, and I think this is in part because they're really hard for almost all of us to set and to defend. Maybe because boundaries are closely aligned with this unpopular, uncomfortable act of saying no. And nobody likes no. We don't like to hear it, and I think actually most of us hate to say it even more. But over the years, I've learned that a solid boundary up front can actually end up sparing me a lot of no's. I think the clearer I can be about what I am or am not willing to do, and what I do or do not accept as part of my responsibility portfolio, the less I need to actually make refusals in real time. So it's like that set of preemptive no's makes it less necessary for me to keep saying active situational no's. Now, not always. Sometimes you still have to actively say no, but less often. And I find that I really prefer that. So I love my TED Talks. And I recently saw a really good one with a therapist named Nedra Glover Tawwab, who wrote a book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace, which I read and I really liked. The subtitle on that, and I don't have it in front of me unfortunately, but it's something like A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself. And I think that's an important choice of words. One of the things that she talks about is the fact that good boundary setting is not about telling other people what they can or can't do. Rather, boundary setting done right is really just you placing limits on yourself, defining the outer edge of what you're willing to do or accept for yourself. So there's something about the act of flipping that point of emphasis around from trying to control others to only controlling myself that can really help me feel more at peace with setting boundaries in the workplace or anywhere really. Now this author makes a second equally important point in her talk and in her book, and that's that we can't assume that other people have the same rules for life that we have. So often we don't consciously think about, much less share, our own expectations. It's just sort of human nature to figure that the way we live and think and work is the way all reasonable humans should live and think and work. But that's just not always the case. Our assumed norm may be quite different from the assumed norms of the guy working at the desk across from us. Not better or not worse, just different. And the best way to discover this is through clear, early proactive communication instead of through what usually happens in these situations, which is kind of a slow process of accumulating grievances or creeping quiet loathing. For example, let's say I need to leave immediately when my shift ends, as scheduled. Or maybe I don't intend to be in contact with the office at all on my PTO days. I might need to explicitly communicate that and possibly even negotiate it if I find that my expectations are out of step with the prevailing workplace culture, where people may routinely stay for unscheduled overtime or answer emergency texts even during vacation. The big lesson there is that I can't just assume that the people working around me will act as I act, or that they'll instinctively understand what I need to be productive. We have to communicate that shit. I think a lot of us have been taught that it's maybe better to bottle up all of our own expectations and needs in the workplace. Just keep it quiet, keep it profesh at all costs. But I personally can only do that for so long. And look, we spend an enormous proportion of our lives either in the workplace or interacting with colleagues or ruminating on both. And there are a few things that can make me more miserable than a job I don't like or a workplace that doesn't seem to fit for me. So considering and communicating boundaries in the workplace can, for me at least, mean a dramatic shift in the quality of my daily life. So sometimes it's worth popping the cork and sharing around our expectations and boundaries in a way that's as pleasant and as collegial as possible. And when I really think about it, the workplace is exactly the right place to be thinking about how to codify my own boundaries. And that's because the workplace is actually built on a system of policies and processes which are really just examples of your employer's own boundaries. Somebody else is probably setting your work hours or your PTO policy or the expectations surrounding evaluation and promotion, all of that stuff. And at the start of this whole process, they probably also set up a job description or a portfolio of responsibilities that form the agreed upon boundaries around why you were hired and what you were meant to do. So you've probably got some prefab fences there all ready to work with. But I've found that when I'm actually in a role doing the work and collaborating with a team of others, I've almost always discovered lots of gaps in the company's fence. Lots of little things and sometimes a few big things that I haven't negotiated or that my employer hasn't set policies around. And just a lot of questions sort of hanging out in the many gray areas that have shadowed every single workplace I've ever been in. Maybe it's whether or not my team will read and respond to texts after hours. And if so, what time does that expectation cut off at night? Or what constitutes an appropriately detailed or active response after hours? Is this only in urgent situations? And if so, what constitutes urgency? If you never actually talk about that with the 10 or 12 people on your team, then you're probably working with 10 or 12 different definitions and answers. Personally, I need clarity on things like that. And unless it's something I've already discussed and accepted as part of the job, I try to think about where my preferred boundary is and then advocate for that when it comes time to clarify a policy. But very often we don't do that, or at least I don't. I can sometimes just give in and go with the flow. So if my coworkers are chiming in on a group text at 10 p.m., I'm sometimes a little bit too willing to chime in right back. And then sometimes something happens that's bigger than just me and my own personal boundaries. If we as a team are not thoughtful and intentional, we can all get caught up in an ever-expanding web of assumed expectations. And assumed expectations just by their nature stretch and grow until they become overwhelming and sometimes unsustainable. Maybe you find yourself in a workplace where nobody takes time off. It's possible that the people around you are not using their time off because nobody else around them is using their time off. And not because there's been an official call for people to take minimal PTO, just for example. I'm surprised by how often expectation creep is actually accidental or unconscious as much as it is sort of official. So I think it helps when the people around us are often in the process of minding and mending their own fences because they're more likely to challenge assumed expectations that are getting out of hand. And really, that helps everybody. I think this is a place where I have felt somewhat more empowered as I've aged up and leveled up a little bit in the workplace. So when I see an opportunity to examine and enforce my own boundaries, I try to think about how that power actually creates a better atmosphere for me and for everybody else. And I think this is especially true if you work in a place where there are younger folks who might be less practiced or more tentative about building their own fences, and often for good reasons. Okay, so let's say I've done that. I've drawn that boundary around my role and my responsibilities and my working conditions, and I've built a fence between what I will or won't do, or what I am or am not working on. Whoop whoop, let the good times roll. And wouldn't it be great if I actually could stop there with just shutting out all the stuff I don't agree to do? But sadly, that's only the first step of two. Because the other side of that coin, I should say the other side of that fence, it's a better use of the metaphor. Anyway, the other side of that fence is that I've also made very clear what I am taking responsibility for and where my territory does lie. So, although I think it's completely worth it, just be advised that this is kind of a double-edged sword, this whole boundary setting thing. Because when you tell people what you aren't going to do, you're also telling them in some form or fashion what you are going to do. So now you damn well better do it. I don't have a real full physics of why that happens, but I do think that when you become more exacting about what you will or won't do, people expect you to become more exacting about executing the plan that those boundaries sort of put in place around your performance in the workplace. So that's the practical and sort of utilitarian importance of working that ground that you've put a fence around. But I think there's also sort of a psychological significance to taking that second step. Working the ground you've fenced is also important because it helps us feel better about the boundary in the first place. As I mentioned before, setting boundaries is inherently guilt-producing. At least it is for me, and I think for a lot of us. And I always feel a little bit better about setting them and a little more empowered to enforce them if I feel really confident that I'm keeping up my end of the bargain. So when I'm out of the office, I'm out. But conversely, when I'm on, I need to be on. And somehow each of these commitments just reinforces the other. So, build your fences, but also work your ground. Work all of it. Work every acre you claim. So I'm talking about this in the context of work, but obviously this applies really broadly to all kinds of situations and relationships. It's just as important to set boundaries around how you will be treated and what responsibilities and roles you're willing to assume in all kinds of connections and collaborations. And it's equally important, if not more so, to live up to those commitments and agreements in partnerships or friendships or households, as well as in workplaces. The idea of building your fences and working your ground can be useful in a lot of those other situations too, I think. Okay, so what's my execution score here? I think I'm probably going to have to split my points up to arrive at any kind of fair assessment, because I got a couple different things going on here. First, I'm going to give myself a pretty high ranking of a solid 8 when it comes to working my ground, at least on a good day. If I've said I'm going to assume a responsibility or meet a deadline or follow a policy, I generally do it. And I'm even more likely to meet those expectations if I've had a hand in creating them for myself and sort of setting up that boundary that I'm working to fill. So then I'm going to give myself maybe a 6 on building those fences in the first place. I know I'm just not as strong at setting boundaries as I am about filling them once they have been set. But I think I'm getting better at this as I go. I see some progress in my capacity to articulate and advocate for my boundaries. And I think that's because over the years, I really have come to see this as something that benefits others as well as me, and that really builds connection and communication with my team instead of straining those things. And as I pop those two scores up next to each other, I realize that it looks like a little bit of a humble brag situation. Like, oh, I'm just better at delivering for others than I am for advocating for myself. I guess I'm just some kind of tragic workplace saint. But that is not how that plays out in real life at all. Because when I fail to set boundaries well, yeah, it hurts me, but it also comes back to hurt the team. I'm just not a patient, long-suffering soul. So when I don't feel that the fences I'm working within are strong and fair, I can get irritable and I can get disengaged. I can become, if not straight up hard to work with, then, less easy to work with than I can be in good working conditions within strong fences. And that's not good for anybody involved. It's not self-sacrifice on my part. It's not a gift to the others around me. It's a problem. So it's my job and my responsibility to get better at both sides of this equation. So I guess that averages out to a score of 7 out of 10, which, means overall I'm doing okay in this category, but I'm still working on it. I'm still plugging away imperfectly but doggedly on building my fences and then working all the ground within them. So finally, as I've been droning on about all this, it has occurred to me that I need to close with a caveat. No principle works every time in every environment, and the reality is that sometimes we find ourselves in a workplace where we're just not able to set clear boundaries or work the chosen ground within them. Sometimes we're expected to do all the things all the time and without adequate compensation sometimes or even credit. I've had jobs like that before, and there have been circumstances in my life where I've been grateful to have the job, and I might well have one like that again. And I know it's not always an option to just stalk out in a huff and get a different job in a greener pasture with a better fence. So I don't want anything I've said today to sound like an indictment of anybody who is not, at this time and place, able to build their own fences and work only their chosen ground. Because out there in the real world, it's not always as easy as it sounds. Okay, so that's enough of this for today. If you are out there eyeing a fence that maybe needs some building or mending, or some ground that needs working, I wish you good luck. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and I'll be back next week with thing number 4.